The Bible is one unified story, but about 30% of it is made up of ancient poetry. Poetry is everywhere in the Bible, and it has a different purpose than stories. Poems ignite your imagination through verbal art. Biblical poems are free verse. They are structured by couplets, two short lines that are carefully worded and placed beside each other. The first line makes the basic statement, and the second line develops it in some way. It can do this by completing the thought, deepening it with different words and images, or by contrasting it in some way. Couplets are repetitive language to force us to slow down and to linger, to feel the meaning of it all. It helps us to look at it from more than one angle. Groups of couplets can be formed together around one key idea, viewing it from different angles. Biblical poets also use repetition on a larger scale. A key line repeating itself multiple times is called a refrain. Or it can open and close with a similar couplet, and that's called inclusio. Biblical poets use repetition to create patterns. It's verbal artwork through design and repetition so that the reader can make connections to deeper meaning. To slow down, to ponder, allow your mind to be pulled in a new direction, and to discover new ideas. Poetic literature in the Bible includes, but is not limited to, the Psalms, which is a book of poems or songs, the prophets, Isaiah through Malachi. The prophets were poets. Ecclesiastes is poetic. Job is a book of poetry and speeches given in a stylistic fashion. The building blocks of poetry are figures of speech and parallelisms. Under figures of speech, we see similes. Similes are a stated comparison between two things that resemble one another and use the word like or as. Like in Psalms 1, 3 through 4, it says, like a tree planted by a river. That is a simile. We also see personifications as a figure of speech, and that's assigning characteristics of human beings to a lifeless object. We see an example of that in Psalms 35:10. A hyperbole is an exaggeration to emphasize a point, and that is also used as a figure of speech. For example, have you ever said something like, I've told you 1,000 times, and you didn't really say it 1,000 times, but you're exaggerating your point to get the message across. We can see an example of that in Psalms 6:6, where it says, flood my bed with tears. Metaphors are another figure of speech. We must deal with the literal form first before we can draw from what it's being compared to. In Luke 13:31 through 32, we see Jesus refer to Herod as a fox. So we must think about the literal form of a fox. It's cunning, it's sly, it's red, or has a bushy tail. So thinking about the characteristics of the fox, we're not going to assume that Herod has a bushy tail. Obviously, that's not true. Jesus is comparing the cunning and slyness of a fox to Herod. Poetry invites us to experience ideas with our imaginations while learning information. Metaphors are another way that we see poetry in the Bible. It's metaphorical language that we use all the time. For example, giving someone the cold shoulder, or saying that someone warmed up to you. Taking a basic concept like warmth and attaching it to an abstract concept like affection. Metaphors provide the framework of how our minds make sense of the world. Metaphors govern our thinking and our language. Metaphors are everywhere in our language and shape our imaginations and our behavior. Some metaphors are easy to understand, and some may seem strange to us because they were written in an ancient culture. Metaphors are rooted in images from biblical narrative, and you need the narrative to understand the poetic images. The images reveal a deeper meaning. Being aware of the building blocks and knowing how to read poems will enhance your reading and knowledge of God's Word. Slow the pace down and enjoy, soak it in, and allow revelation to come through pondering His truth.